Hi, and welcome to this video lesson titled Facebook Marketing Basics. I'm Alice Roach, and I'm a Senior Research Associate in the Division of Applied Social Sciences at the University of Missouri. This video lesson is part of a project titled Marketing Opportunities for Missouri's Niche Meat and Poultry Processors. The project received funding from the Missouri Agricultural and Small Business Development Authority, and using that funding, a team at the University of Missouri has developed information and resources that Missouri meat businesses can use to strengthen their marketing efforts. So in this particular video, I'll share more about who tends to be using the Facebook platform, the extent to which they're using the platform, and why they tend to be using the platform. And then I'll close today by sharing more about the Facebook algorithm, so you have a better understanding of why Facebook includes some posts in users' news feeds instead of others. But to get started, I wanted to share with you some background about who tends to be using the Facebook platform. So every day, the number of users accessing Facebook exceeds 1.6 billion people. So this is a very large audience that's being attracted to the platform. And on a daily basis, when you have that many users, they are clearly a fairly loyal audience. To put that point estimate into context and give it a little more meaning, I want to share some data from the Pew Research Center. It conducted some research in the first quarter of 2019 to better understand the percentage of US adults that were using various social media platforms. And what it found was that about 70% of US adults said they had used Facebook at some point. So again, this is a pretty wide swath of the US adult population. The extent to which people had used Facebook did vary somewhat according to different demographic factors, and one of those was gender. So women were more likely than men to have said that they used Facebook at some point. About 3/4 of women said that they had used the platform at some point, compared with slightly less than 2/3 of men. Geography was another demographic factor that tended to affect whether people had used Facebook. Urban US adults were more likely than rural US adults to have used the platform. So about 75% of the urban US adults said that they had used the platform at some point, compared with 2/3 of rural US adults. Education level was another factor that tended to affect whether someone had used Facebook at some point. So college educated US adults were more likely than other US adults to have used the platform. About 75% of college educated US adults said that they had used the platform at some point, and that compared to about just 3 in 5 of US adults who had a high school diploma or less education. The last demographic factor that I wanted to point out would be age. So for teens, Facebook was once a really popular platform, but that popularity has declined somewhat over time. In 2018, about half of teens said that they were using Facebook. And so that made Facebook rank number 4 in terms of the social platforms that teens were using. As more social media platforms have emerged, teens have been more excited about using those new platforms. So in 2018, teens were more likely to have used Snapchat, Instagram, and YouTube than they were to have used Facebook. Seniors are an audience that has had growing acceptance of Facebook. About half of them, according to that first quarter of 2019 research, said that they had used the platform at some point, and Facebook was actually the most used platform among that senior audience. So now that we have some context about who's using the platform, I want to dive deeper and understand the extent to which they're using the platform and what's motivating them to use the platform. So about 3/4 of US active Facebook users are saying that they're going to the site on a daily basis. So again, this is a pretty loyal audience. The Facebook platform is clearly giving this audience what they expect in terms of a good user experience. It's maybe creating a community, and also it's giving them content that they're looking for. In terms of when these users tend to be accessing the platform, it appears as if middays on Wednesdays and Thursdays is a peak time for use. So if you're looking for a time to post on Facebook and you're just beginning your Facebook page, that midday period from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Wednesdays and Thursdays would be a good place to start with your post timing. If you have a more established Facebook presence, instead of referring to these general best practices, I would urge you to look into your analytics data for your specific page. And using those analytics data, you can find times of the day and days of the week when your specific audience is more likely to be on the platform. In terms of why people are going to Facebook, there was some interesting research conducted in the third quarter of 2019 that looked into the leading reasons for using Facebook. And what that research found was that overwhelmingly, users were going to Facebook to keep in contact with their family and friends. So that was true for about 90% of the consumers included in that research. Getting entertainment and getting news were other top reasons for using Facebook. So you as a marketer can take this information when you're developing your content, and you can focus on finding ways to talk about the people who are involved in your business and sharing information in an entertaining way and providing news about your business and your products and services. So all of that type of content would appear to resonate with users according to these findings. As a marketer, you might find it that it's a little unfortunate or alarming that it doesn't appear as if people are going on the platform exclusively to follow brands and companies, according to the research that you see up on the screen from the third quarter of 2019. Although interacting with brands and companies doesn't appear to be a leading use for Facebook, that doesn't mean that consumers aren't connecting with companies and brands. In fact, 2/3 of consumers say that they have connected with a branded page. It just doesn't appear to be a leading use that's motivating them to go to the platform. So how do you make your branded page resonate with users, given that interacting with a branded page may not be a top motivating factor, but it's something that people will still consider on the Facebook platform? Well, if I were to answer this question, I would answer it in two parts. The first is that it's really important to understand your audience. And second, it's important to understand how the Facebook algorithm works. And so your content will be perceived positively by that algorithm. So I've already shared some data about the audience on Facebook. And so you can use that information to make good decisions about when you post, what you're posting, and so forth. But I wanted to also share some insights about why users tend to follow brands on social media, so you have a clearer understanding of what consumers are expecting from branded content. And according to that research, the top two reasons motivating people to follow a brand on social media would be to learn about new products and services and also stay updated on company news. So as you're developing your Facebook content, content in both of these areas would be worthwhile considering, because it appears that consumers are most interested in that new product and service information, and then also staying updated on company news. So the second part of my response to how you create a branded page that resonates with users is to understand how the Facebook algorithm works. So if you're not familiar with the algorithm, I'll try to explain it here in a simplified way. The algorithm is essentially a set of rules that Facebook uses to sort, order, and present the posts that you see in a news feed. And so what Facebook's ultimately trying to do is, through this algorithm, reward the posts that it views as relevant for a particular user. So posts that are relevant will more likely appear higher in a news feed relative to posts that aren't as relevant. Unfortunately, Facebook does not publish its algorithm or publicly say what's important to its algorithm, but there are some industry resources available that can kind of sense what's happening with the Facebook algorithm based on what we see in terms of posts that are loading in the news feed. So I want to share some insights from those industry publications to help you better understand how that algorithm works. First of all, the algorithm appears to give preference to content that's been posted by a user's family and friends, not necessarily brands. So when Facebook made this shift to its algorithm to focus more on content from people, family and friends, that really concerned some marketers because they were somewhat uncertain about whether their content would still be appearing in people's news feeds. But given this shift, I think that marketers can still effectively create content that somewhat aligns with what the algorithm would like to see. And one way to do that is to post about people. So I think it's clear from earlier that people go on Facebook to learn about other people. So if you can talk about your employees, your customers, members of your community with which you're engaging, those are examples of posts that can be people-driven and still have a connection to your company. The second recommendation in this area is to include employees in your engagement plan. So your employees are people. when they're posting about your business, that can be viewed positively by the algorithm. You can encourage them to amplify the posts that you're creating by liking, commenting, or sharing. You could also create some sample posts and share those with your employees so then they can post them on their own pages. The second point about the algorithm that I wanted to bring up would be to share that Facebook tends to avoid displaying posts that it considers to be misleading or too much like spam. So there are a couple of recommendations that fall under this umbrella area. And the first is to steer clear of controversy. So controversial subjects tend to have rather polarizing views. Polarizing views can be perceived as being misleading according to the algorithm. So a good rule of thumb is to avoid posting about those controversial topics on your business page. Secondarily, you can think about ways to facilitate engagement and avoid a common mistake that many pages make. And that mistake is that in a post, you may want to facilitate engagement. So you overtly ask for people to make comments or you ask people to like the post. Those types of requests are viewed as spam by Facebook's algorithm. So you can still find ways to facilitate engagement without being so overt in those requests. For example, if you want to spark some dialogue, instead of asking for comments, instead pose an open-ended question, and then hopefully that question will spark people to add some comments. The third point related to the Facebook algorithm is that it tends to favor some types of content more than others. And one of the types of content that the Facebook algorithm really seems to like is video. Facebook leadership has been publicly saying that they would like to see Facebook be more of a video-driven platform. So that's probably why we see the algorithm preferring video content. So if you're looking for new types of content to add to your content plan on Facebook, video might be an option for you. The second point related to this topic of what type of content to choose would be to judiciously use links in your posts. So when you add a link to a post, that link is oftentimes taking users away from the Facebook platform and bringing them to other resources online. Well, Facebook views that as a concern because if someone clicks on a link and is shifted outside of the platform or directed outside of the platform, they may not return to the platform. And so Facebook sees links as a threat to preserving their audience on the platform. And so if you can find other ways to share content without adding links in every post, that would be a consideration for you. The last comment related to the algorithm is that it does tend to favor posts that have a history of engagement. So when I say engagement, that's referring to any sort of action that's taking place. So whenever a user is liking, commenting, sharing, those are all examples of actions that they're taking to interact with a particular piece of content, and those actions are noted as engagements. So to develop engaging content, you'll want to choose content that your audience is most likely to like. So that gets to the point earlier that you really need to know about your audience and know what they would want to see on the platform, so then you can then offer that type of content to them. Also, you'll want to time your post to be able to maximize reach. So you want to post whenever you have the greatest chance to reach the greatest number of people. You can refer to some of those general best practices, for instance, that midday period on Wednesday and Thursday if you're just getting started with your Facebook page, because that time seems to be when the greatest number of Facebook users are online. However, if you do have an established Facebook presence, again, really mine your analytics data to find out all you can about your audience, and those data points within that Insights tab on Facebook will be able to kind of guide you into choosing the times and the days of the week that are best for reaching your audience. So to close this presentation today, I want to really put one last emphasis on engagement. So again, engagements are any sort of interactions that are happening between a user and the content that's posted on Facebook. And I find this data interesting because it's looking at typical user behaviors within a month-long period on Facebook. So you can see that the average user is liking 13 posts, commenting 8 times, and sharing 2 posts. So I just want to sort of give this to you as food for thought about how your role as a marketer and your goal as a marketer is to think about ways in which you can create engaging content that will ultimately capture some of this typical behavior, engagement behavior that's happening among users. So that wraps up this Facebook Basics video. Thanks so much for joining us. There is a companion video that shares more best practices about Facebook. You can access that companion video by looking for the link in the description. Thank you.